The Liberals have always been the party of building infrastructure that benefits everyone.
I'll maybe make her right in Sydney, I don't know. What? Is that it? Yep, that's Tony for you. Australia's first Prime Minister / Mayor. Yeah, it's no more than I deserve.
We understand that if you're going to pander to an electorate that's that hangdog, you need to have a cabinet full of people with self-esteem that low or even lower. None more so than Malcolm Turnbull, who, whether he's a successful merchant banker or the federal opposition leader, his underlying message has always been the same. Father, why won't you say you're proud of your boy? Oh, I'm sure he is. What's not to love? You're the chief demolition man of Australia's once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to become one of the world's leading digital economies. Which I guess means you can also add medieval king to his resume, as it seems his taxpayer-funded job is to mill around his lavish castle thinking about how to keep the peasants from educating themselves. Yep, you pay for that service. And when he's not deliberately trying to stop Australia from developing into something other than a giant toilet for Andrew Twiggy yelling,
Hurry up! Make the hole bigger! I had Mexican last night.
He's purposely ignoring Optus, Primus Telecom, Vodafone, Apple, Microsoft, the Australian Chamber of Commerce, the Australian Mobile Telecommunications Association, and even Google, all unequivocally stating that Labor's NBN plan would have been just as vital an enabler of innovation, economic growth and entrepreneurship in the 21st century as national highways and the electric grid were in the 20th century. Very fitting to highlight highways as the example of 20th century thinking when Tony Abbott has repeatedly stated he wants to be remembered as the Prime Minister that built a lot of roads. Face it, he's living in a time warp. He needs help.
Well, we'd all love an actual broadband network, but in the real world, time and money do matter, and Labor's plan was taking 10 years.
To place a national fibre optic network around the entire continent?
Too long. We can get ours done by 2016, I guarantee it.
Malcolm's super cool, optimistic version of the real world. We can cover the exact same ground in 2 years, and I'll be inaugurated Prime Minister for my efforts. My dad will look down at me lovingly, fondly, just like in Star Wars, as I play the lyre over the burning fibre optics cable, crying, Admit it! You don't need a state-of-the-art broadband network when you have such a talented musician as I to regale your droll and wretched spirits with such angelic music.
But it was never to be. Malcolm knew months before the election that 2016 was far too fanciful a date for completion, but he said it anyway. At his own peril.
So he had the date upgraded, dudes!
2019. 1 year's difference.
Ooh, looks like your precious government doesn't love you after all.
Do not listen to Julia, faithful rabble. I've saved this country 94 billion talents.
Do you mean dollars?
Well, I believe that copper is the greatest material to make a broadband network out of. You can't be too surprised by me believing that we're using a currency that's over 2,000 years old.
Oh, I don't know if the nation can afford 94 billion. Literally, I have no idea. I'm just going by the intonation in his voice. It is too much money.
Glad you gotta say. The facts are, even if it did cost $94 billion, after you take into account the projected revenue Australia would have likely received from a competent broadband network, the Treasury would have only been slightly in the red. But apart from that, Malcolm was just slightly off in his projected figures by
$21 billion.
Well, I've never been very good with calculators. Would you like to know something else about me?
No, that's okay, Malcolm. It's getting pretty late.
Please, do not deny me the opportunity to brag about how great I am. It's my version of oxygen! Then why don't you brag about this? Turnbull's NBN plan, when assessed by non-partisan experts, is far more likely to be a financial burden on Australia than Labor's.
Yeah, I forgot to factor in a basic principle of economics, which is that apparently people don't like paying for a service that's shit.
Labor's would have most likely seen a modest return of 1.7 to 5.3%.
Damn, we could have privatised something else.
While the Liberal parties, by virtue of its own technical limitations, could prove unable to deliver enough revenues to justify being built in the first place. Oh well, innocent blunders happen, do they not? Yeah, we're just a bunch of unhip squares. Yeah, that's the level of scrutiny it deserves. Obviously, this ball of convenient blunders had nothing at all to do with a little catch-up Tony and Rupert had back in 2012 where they didn't discuss the NBN at all. But amazingly, the very next day, while all the details of them not discussing the NBN were fresh on Tony's mind, Mr. Abbott outlined the Liberal Party's brand new policy on broadband.
Stranger things have happened.
Kind of like how this 83-year-old seems to have an awful lot of interest in a fibre optics network being built, which could have stopped he and Telstra from having a monopoly on cable television.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's in the nation's interest for someone else to be offering hundreds of other channels filled with more documentaries about Hitler starting to lose the war and...
Some too cool for school quote-unquote quirky ethnic mix host in Thailand here who can sort of claim heritage to the region if you go back 4 generations that's about to eat something that's really bugging me. Crickets! Did you know they eat that here? We've only been discussing it since 2005 on Travel and Living. Maybe it hasn't sunk in yet.
See, why do you even need an NBN? I'm teaching you about the world, $50 a month.
Thanks, Rupert. Not at all willing to give us the opportunity to visit any of these places by giving the people and the businesses of our country a head start in the digital economy.
Nah, I've been everywhere. It's not all it's cracked up to be. Just watch it on telly.
A prospect most other developed nations could only dream of due to the ravages of the global financial crisis, which if the current government were in at the time of its scourge would have had us engulfed in it as well. Astoundingly, voting down stimulus packages that save tens of billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of jobs, yet still has the nerve to proclaim themselves as the party that stands for a stronger economy.
Yeah, I'll buy that. They keep repeating it, talking the talk. That's good.
They certainly do, with their incessant harpings for economic prosperity above all else, which on even the slightest of research into their claims proves to be less a belief they hold than an Orwellian con they pull over and over again to keep fools voting for a party that can't wait to punish them for their gullibility. As one of the very first acts they could barely wait to run through Parliament was to embark on the modern equivalent of replacing plans for a railway system with a conga line of donkeys and mules.
Mules are the latest in donkey technology.
Which simultaneously proves their utter contempt for the public's welfare and severs any credibility whatsoever they held to the idea that they, above all other parties, believe in the power of a free market, as they willingly handed over one of the most important free market enabling tools ever conceived to be tailored exactly to the likings of a single despicable, bitter old man.
My papers don't think I'm bitter.
Very close to death, but still so selfish that he'd sooner impoverish his own birth nation's prospects than have his sad scourge of an empire challenged.
And that's why we needed a change in government, for the good of Fox Footy.
Whose use to society is perfectly exemplified by the fact that it was mainly built off reruns of shows like Married with Children.
Well, it's a family you can all relate to.
Because you're keeping us that way, you miserable clown!
Go and watch some SpongeBob.
Yay, Patrick, my favourite. Malcolm Turnbull's Broadband, the worst option money can buy.
Please press the subscribe button now.
Come on.